Yes, folks, New Zealand will soon have a referendum, a binding referendum on the legalisation of marijuana, which in fact isn't binding at all. But folks, I think most of us when we were young smoked dope at some point. And we soon got over it. It's a silly phase kids go through, and I don't think things have changed. So why are we even having this referendum? I don't see thousands of people marching up Queen Street demanding marijuana. It just doesn't make any sense. Anyway, when it finally comes around, I will be saying no, or be voting no, for the following 5 reasons, and I'll read these out now. Number 1, we don't know what we're voting for. We don't get to vote on the final legislation. Number 2, after decades of the government telling us to keep our lungs clean from tobacco residue, they're now asking us to fill our lungs up with marijuana residue. This push for dope has nothing, number 3, this push for dope has nothing to do with your freedom. It's all about tax. As tobacco dies out, so does the excise tax. So now they're going to look for another way, which is marijuana, to tax, to replace the cigarette tax, which is currently about 78%, and marijuana is it. Number 4, we never know what follows. We introduce something new and something else we didn't think about follows. Now, we introduce marijuana. Is heavier drugs going to follow? Well, that's exactly what's happening in Colorado at present. They're now pushing for the decriminalisation of magic mushrooms. And let's not forget, we let in gay marriage, didn't we? And I think a lot of people are regretting that now. We're now losing our free speech because of gays. Israel Folau, for example. And we're also now having to deal with this gender nonsense. Now, we let that in. And I can guarantee a lot of people are regretting that right now. Number 5, we can't smoke cigarettes in public establishments anymore. Yet we're going to be able to smoke marijuana in licensed premises. So whatever happened to that thing called passive smoking? That seems to have gone. So anyway, folks, today I'll start this off with our dear leader, Jacinda. And folks, I've edited this video a bit because it was a bit long.
Will this referendum be binding? So what the people say, the people get?
Yeah, and so I'm going to leave the details to the Minister of Justice, who's going to be making an announcement today. Keeping in mind, though, that, of course, our Parliament is always sovereign. So that, of course, means that you can go as far as you can with commitments, but ultimately every new Parliament is able to...
So in other words, it's not binding.
Dictate what it does. So, but I will leave, though, ultimately Minister Little to set out the way that we're going to deal as much as we can do with those issues. Ultimately, though, the question for us has been whether or not we think New Zealanders should decide on this issue. And our view is they should. A number of other jurisdictions have done the same. They've asked the public. These issues tend to, when they're decided from Parliament, are actually what they call conscience votes, where individual MPs decide on their own rather than parties. So in this case, our view is that this has been debated for a long time. It's been debated globally. Let's ask people.
Yeah, but she never ever asked the people, or she didn't push for a referendum when it came to gay marriage in New Zealand. We just got it. We got it forced down our throats.
But let's give them as much information and certainty as we can when they make their decision.
So your policy was binding. Have you changed your Labour Party policy on this?
No, we've already said that it would be binding, but of course, again, as I say, when parliaments are sovereign,
yes,
when parliaments are able to do exactly, it's just how you make it as binding as it can be.
Yes.
generally.
As a mother, though, if your daughter goes to a party at age 20 and says to you before she goes, "Mum, there's going to be lots of marijuana there tonight, should I smoke it?" What do you say?
Oh, again, and these are conversations that every individual parent would want to have with their children based on the best evidence that we have
What
available,
would you say, though?
their
What
knowledge.
would you say, though, Prime Minister?
Yeah, what would you say?
My avoidance of personalising this is because everyone deals with these issues already, Duncan. And ultimately, I don't want to be the arbiter personally for an issue that actually there are
You're the
lots
Prime
of
Minister.
arguments both sides.
No, but you're setting up a referendum on this. You actually are the
To
arbiter
ask
of
the
this.
public.
Yeah, she won't even answer that simple question. Would you allow your daughter to smoke dope?
To ask the public, Duncan, not to me, myself, be the...
For a cannabis referendum, will it be announced later today? Will it be binding? Yes, to a point, and then Parliament will get to have a final vote by the looks of this. Joining us now is the Deputy Leader and Drug Spokesperson for the National Party, Paula Bennett. G'day, Paula, good morning.
Good morning.
So it seems like, from what we managed to get out of the Prime Minister this morning, that yes, it's binding, but that Parliament it'll go back to the Parliament for a final say, some kind of a vote of approval or whatever. What do you make of that?
Yes, so they're doing option 3, and I believe they're making the announcement about 9 o'clock this morning. So, and in that it is a question, and the question is proposed on the draft legislation. I can possibly read it to you.
Yes, go for it. Your leak is so good, you even know. Your leak is so good, you even know the time of the announcement this morning.
Yes, we were told that yesterday. Do you support legalising the personal use of recreational cannabis in accordance with draft legislation? So that means they're going to draft it up. It means it doesn't go through the select committee process, which I think is a shame because they then get into the detail. If it's select committee, you have experts alongside of it, and it actually has to be a piece of legislation that has gone through that to be binding. So this won't be binding.
Right.
So there you go, folks. It's not binding at all. So now let's listen about tax.
New research shows decriminalising cannabis and introducing a regulated market would be a boost for New Zealand's economy. The government is working through plans to hold a referendum on legalising cannabis on or before the 2020 election. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
The report, prepared for the Drug Foundation by economist Shamobeel Yakov, estimates that up to $240 million in tax could be gathered each year from a regulated market.
So there you go. There's the tax, folks.
Mr. Yakov says the US states that have legalised cannabis, and more recently Canada, have models that would work in New Zealand.
The most important gains you can get from it is you can bring it into the formal economy. You can make sure you can regulate the quality, the potency, who accesses it, all those other bits and pieces that we do with alcohol and tobacco already. So it's not like we don't know how to do it. So we have a lot of experience to be able to do this well. And we get to bring in a lot of that revenue off the black market from the criminal economy into the formal economy.
Yes. So in other words, the government is now going to be the new drug pusher. So now let's listen about lungs.
Thank you guys for hanging out with us here at Let's Talk About Cannabis, learning about weed, its effects, and everything that has to do with your life. My name is Edgar from the New Guys, 97.1 AMP Radio. We got Mike from the world famous K-Rock, and straight up just a fountain of wisdom, Dr. Drew. Does anybody have any questions in regards to marijuana, weed? Yeah.
Can smoking weed really damage your lungs?
You know, the old-fashioned way, yeah. It's almost every chronic marijuana user that I treated had chronic bronchitis, which is a relative of emphysema, that kind of thing. So it does. There's been concern over the years of lung cancer. Never really made a tight connection with that. The stuff I've seen is more the airway damage from smoke. I mean, you put a smoke in your lung, it irritates your airways. That's it is. And there are lesser damaging ways of doing it. People vape and people volatilize it in different ways, and so it's less irritating. But ultimately, you're still putting a hot volatilized substance into your lungs, and it irritates. But not as bad as the smoke itself. The smoke really damages the lungs.
So the smoke really damages the lungs, yet our government is quite happy for people to damage their lungs through marijuana smoke. Now, folks, let's listen to Ben Court from Colorado.
The real money is being made in that other chemical, in THC. So THC is the natural part of the plant that gets you high. And before the 1970s, cannabis contained less than 0.5% of THC. That's what's naturally occurring. Over the last 40 years, as we became better gardeners, that percentage of THC started to slowly but steadily rise. Until recently, when the chemists started to get involved. These guys moved cultivation exclusively indoors, and they made grow cycles extremely and unnaturally short. They also started to use pesticides and fertilizers in some ways that we should be concerned with. In fact, I was recently talking to a buddy who had just left a job at a commercial grow operation because he was so concerned with the chemicals that he was being asked to interact with. Some of his fellow employees were actually encouraged to wear hazmat suits while they were spraying their chemical cocktails on the plants. With that kind of manipulation, the products that are being sold today can contain above 30% THC. And our concentrates can actually contain above 95% THC.
Yes. And folks, the Greens are pushing for this. And we hear this argument about alcohol being worse, which it clearly isn't. But even if it were worse, why would we add to it?